Yeah, my question is, what did we do in the past that this is going to help us to go forward now? This study that you're doing, what did we do in the past? Who can answer that?
A lot of municipalities, I can't answer specifically for Cornwall because I don't know, but a lot of municipalities will find they'll get to the same results, but it'll take longer. It's not always consistent. We know from our research there has been archaeological assessments done within the city's boundaries, so the municipality's been doing something. Often we find these days smaller municipalities, they don't know the legislation unless they have a particular planner that has some background and heritage. Some of the development goes through without any archaeological assessment whatsoever. A lot of smaller towns will catch up with something like the Ministry of Transport will go through, and they're required to do archaeological assessments, and the town will kind of be like, huh, if they're doing it, why aren't we? Again, it's very much a consistency problem. And again, this comes back to developers. One developer is putting in a subdivision and he's been required to do an archaeological assessment because it's been red flagged by someone. And I've had this happen previously, and his neighbor is developing the next subdivision over and he's not required to do archaeology, which can of course cause confusion and bad blood.
I asked that question because of our proximity to Akwesasne and whether there would be in the past burial grounds in what we call our properties here in the city. So I also asked the question because of the cost of doing this. If it's a requirement from the province, then fine. But the cost to me is, I don't know if it's needed or not. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If I could say,
go ahead, Helen.
Sorry, the costs are, it's the developers, it's not the municipality. So the municipality will inform the developer that they need to do this, this, and this before their development application is accepted, and the cost is on the developer.
That makes a lot more sense. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McIntosh.
Just a couple of things. On page 11, we have a map with blue and green dots. So I assume it's designated, non-designated sites. Which ones are the designated ones, the blue or the green?
To be honest, I'm not actually sure.
Okay. Back to the question that Councillor Gardner was asking about developers having to do a study what they're going to develop. Is that a requirement for I'm putting a subdivision in, so bingo, I got to find out what's in the ground, or is that only on selected cases?
That's where our potential modeling comes in. The Ministry of Heritage does have a basic checklist for municipalities, an archaeological potential checklist, and it takes into account things like heritage buildings. Is it so many meters from a heritage building? Is it so many meters from a cemetery? Is it so many meters from a water source? Or there's a number of other variables as well. Yeah. So it really depends on the parcel of land that they're looking to develop. And that's what we're hoping to give the city easy access to as well. So the city isn't going through kind of this vague checklist and guessing. Our potential model will give the city a much clearer idea of, yes, you need an archaeological assessment here, and over here, you don't. And this is the reasons why. Okay. And hopefully planners with the city will be able to contact your GIS department, and maybe some of these maps will also become public on the website as well. So they can go in and pick a parcel of land and see right away, do I need to ask the developer for an archaeological assessment or don't I?
Okay. Back to that map I was talking about on page 11. How does one become a designated heritage site and a non-designated heritage site? Who determines that? Does somebody apply for it, or does the province or the municipality decide that this building is heritage and has to be protected?
I'm not exactly sure in Cornwall's case. It is the municipality. I believe in some cases, like if you would like to designate your house as a heritage building, some municipalities have like a checklist or something you can follow and you can apply to become a designated building. And other circumstances, there's heritage committees and such that will look after that kind of thing. I'm not sure in Cornwall's case off the top of my head.
Okay, I think, Mark, you had given us an update on that a couple of years ago.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So the answer, I think, to your question of which is which, I believe the green sites are the designated sites and the blue are non-designated.
Okay, just wondering.
Yeah.
Just wondering that blue on 2nd Street West sure looks very close to my house.
Yeah, so the designated properties are the ones that have considerable, usually architectural features, et cetera, that are much more highly protected than those that are non-designated. But certainly, as you can see from the chart, we have numerous properties within the city.
Yeah, I think the one I'm referring to is on 2nd Street West. I believe that's the old Lockmaster's house.
Right.
Which is currently going to go on the market and be sold. Having said that, if the Seaway Authority owns the property, to sell it, do they have to do anything special, or is somebody who buys that, only certain things can be done to that building?
Not through you, Mr. Mayor, not necessarily if it's not a designated property. Usually it's just that it has features that are of interest, but if it's designated, that is typically when it has certain characteristics that are absolutely to be preserved, where some of these others that are non-designated have features of interest. I do also want to, if I could just go back to the question from Councillor Gardner on how, what did we do in the past? Quite honestly, in my experience in planning, usually when you ran into a situation, you became educated. I think this is, archaeology and the requirements to study sites, whether it's in subdivisions or a site plan, a major site plan, the requirements on a developer have really been accelerated in the last few years, and rightfully so, because it allows you to know what to expect, as Helen pointed out earlier, a better idea of what you might expect going in, as opposed to years gone by when, quite honestly, we would come across cemeteries and that sort of thing through a subdivision.
Any other questions? All in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you. Thank you again, Helen, for your presentation.
Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Consent items, Mr. Mayor. We have a few proclamations. The first one is recommended that Council proclaim the month of May 2022 as Melanoma and Skin Cancer Awareness Month in the City of Cornwall. And the next is recommending that Council proclaim the month of March 2022 as Endometriosis Awareness Month in the City of Cornwall. Tender 22 TO2 Traffic Control Signals and Electrical Works, recommending that this tender be awarded to Black & McDonald from Ottawa, Ontario, at the total bid price of $275,753.90. RFP 21 PO9 New Transit Fare System, with a recommendation that this RFP be awarded to Transit Fare and Systems Limited from Toronto at the total bid price of $383,459.85. RFP 21 P16 Engineering Design Services for the Future Business Park Expansion, recommending that this RFP be awarded to EVB Engineering from Cornwall for engineering design services at the total bid price of $776,957 without HST. Non-competitive procurement sewer vacuum combination unit, with a recommendation that council approves the non-competitive procurement for the replacement of the existing 2012 VACCON sewer vacuum combination unit for the Municipal Works Department from CM Equipment Incorporated from Repentigny, Quebec, for a total of $585,000 excluding HST. CPEG of February, 130 Pitt Street and 314 9th Street West. The action recommended is that council approve this item. Authorization for future minor variance, zoning, and city-initiated housekeeping applications, with a recommendation that council receive this report.
Motion to approve the consent. Councillor Bennett, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Moving on to resolutions. Our first one is Vincent Massey Drive at Tollgate Road West intersection. Now therefore be it resolved that the city proceed with a municipal class environmental assessment, EA, for the intersection of Vincent Massey Drive and Tollgate Road West, and that the cost be added to the 2022 capital budget submission. That was moved by Councillor Dean Hollingsworth
Right.
and Elaine McDonald. No.
Are you going
From the last,
just on a technicality, I believe the original motion was myself and Eric Bergeron, but if you need a motion again tonight, that's fine.
Need a motion.
Okay, then I'll make it.
Seconder, Councillor Downdale. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Can I speak to the motion, Your Worship?
Sure can.
I hope council approves adding this to the budget. I realize it's a bit of an after the fact. Somewhere between 150 and 200,000, Mr. Fothrop, if I remember the report correctly. The thing is, Your Worship, that corner, as per the report, is not based on, it's not designed properly. The report admits it's not designed properly, and we technically can't do anything to that corner until we do an environmental assessment. I recognize that the numbers are not as high at that corner for accidents as other corners, but anybody who drives through there, certainly with any consistency, will admit it can be very tricky to figure out when you can get through and when you can't. As far as the money goes, Your Worship, $200,000 admittedly is a chunk of change, but there's outstanding money. Currently, the train is going to be stuck in the bureaucratic sort of level. There's $150,000 right off the top that we could easily defer that till next year and use that money for this particular project, only as one example. And quite frankly, I suspect admin would agree that we could take $200,000 out of a working reserve or a general reserve and put that money back when supplemental tax revenues are generated. We have them almost every year. So replenishing that money is really not that much of a reach, particularly when, if we wait till next year and the makeup of council changes, which it invariably does, my fear is that the impetus to push ahead with this will be lost, and it'll kind of sit in some kind of limbo for the next, 4 to 8 years. This corner has been a problem, quite frankly, for as long as I can remember. And the other thing that's noteworthy, and then I'll yield the floor, is that Riverdale is building. The northern part of Riverdale Avenue, there are more and more houses being built right now as we speak. And if I'm not mistaken, Riverdale Avenue is eventually going to lead out onto Power Dam, correct, Mr. Fothrop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
So it's
yes.
only reasonable that more cars will be driving up and through that way to get to anywhere. We're talking about a capital project where we open up Nick Caneb to Tollgate, which means that becomes a much more significant throughway both ways. There's only going to be more cars going through there, Your Worship. So saying, well, let's wait till later doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm obliging my colleagues to think about that. It's not a huge amount of money. We can find it relatively easily, and we replenish it in the next council. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. I was actually the seconder, Councillor Hollingsworth. It's twice today I've been confused for Councillor Bergeron, but that's fine. I supported the motion again tonight because I agree with what Councillor Hollingsworth said. And, he's right. We had a report in front of us that said it's on the top 25 of collisions. But I mean, at the same time, sometimes the collisions there are more serious. The owner of the business at the corner has cameras facing that corner. And he has publicly posted videos of some of the more serious collisions to get attention to the intersection. And if you take a look at them, they are quite serious. The rate of speed along that part of Vincent Massey, I believe, is higher. Maybe it's not at that intersection, but I know it's a 70 near that intersection. And generally people go faster than the posted speed limit there anyway, because they're using it to cut across town quickly or to get to South Stormont. And Councillor Hollingsworth is correct as well. Riverdale's growing. The intent is to connect Riverdale Avenue to Powerdam Road, or Drive, correction. And right now, there is a long-term plan to extend 9th Street into Riverdale, but that's a long-term plan, and that's a lot of ground that has to be covered for the construction of that road. That's going to take a long time. This is an existing road with an existing intersection that provides an alternative entrance into the Riverdale area, and traffic is only going to get busier whether we wait on this or not. The first step is the environmental assessment. It makes sense to have it. It may not have been budgeted for. I understand there's a bit of an extra cost. Generally, if I'm not mistaken, we fund these unexpected costs from working reserves, which requires us to pay it back the next year. I'm also aware that there's, I think, $400,000 in the gas tax reserve that I don't know if this project will qualify or not. That's something we'd have to look at. But I think it's worthwhile to do. It gives us options on the table for next year or the following year, because once the assessment's done, we can look at options, or at least we have it and we can wait for a decision to be made. But I really think we should move forward with this. Thank you.
Any other? Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Sorry.
Mr. Mayor. So I have a question to ask of Mr. Fothrop on this, and that has to do with the way you determine, how your department determines what your priorities are in terms of road work. So I imagine accident rates would be maybe number one, or maybe you can just walk me through.
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So in terms of transportation safety matters, we look at collision rates. So collision rate looks at the volume of vehicles per the number of accidents which occur. We also look at collision severity. So we would get the police reports and determine what is occurring at each of these intersections. We would look at the alignment, the rate of speed. We would do a speed survey to see what the average operating speed is of the intersection and whether or not that's causing a safety issue. We would look at sight lines. There's a number of items that we look at when we determine whether or not the project should move forward or should form part of our 10-year capital plan. In terms of this project, we have looked at the warrants for it and the safety record of the intersection. A number of years ago in 2015 or 2016, the collision rate that we spoke of was quite high for the intersection. There was a certain type of collision that was occurring because there wasn't a westbound left-hand turn lane on Vincent Massey to Tollgate Road West. We've since added that westbound left turn lane, which was previously resulting in rear-end collisions. We've added that turn lane, and the collision rate has dramatically reduced to a level which would be considered good or very good.
Thank you for that. So after, especially after that change was made, where does that intersection rank now among the dangerous ones in the city? Do you have a ranking?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would be, it's outside of our top 25.
So while I appreciate the fact that it's nice to have an environmental assessment done, I'm going to vote against the motion. I think when the situation at that intersection becomes a pressing matter because of collisions and that sort of thing in the future, that we should move on it then, and so not now. Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh?
Yeah, I vote against it I'd rather leave it for the next council. The assessment will be available to the next council, and they can make the decision on, environmental assessment, because Mr. Fother, through you, Mr. Mayor, if we did the environmental assessment, and it comes back for the next council, and they decide to borrow the $4 million or whatever it is it's going to take to build that, how long would it take to put it through? Would it be in 2023? Or would it go, I'm just saying, we have other roundabouts coming online, don't we?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we do. So we have a number of projects that we've identified in our 10-year capital plan. If council made the decision to move ahead with the EA tonight, we would issue an RFP. The EA would take about a year, and the prioritization of the project would be, I guess, subject to council's input at budget time.
Yeah, so I don't see any urgency to this, with the timelines explained for the EA, plus if you go ahead and build the roundabout. I am a frequent user of that intersection, and it depends what time of day. There seems to be a period of maybe an hour and a half in the morning, an hour and a half late afternoon, where it is a busy and it is a challenge maybe to get across if you're crossing. So what I simply do, I make the right-hand turn and go up Vincent Massey to Power Dam and make a left-hand turn on my way home. And ditto for doing the same coming back. So you don't have to use toll gate. You can use Power Dam to Vincent Massey, make the turn, and if you're going further, make another left turn onto toll gate. I'm not trying to complicate this, but there is an very easy way to avoid that intersection if you're nervous about it. Ironically, there are more accidents where the lights are at toll gate and at Vincent Massey and Power Dam there are at this intersection. I think there's even a bigger challenge coming out of, there's just the same challenge coming out of what used to be TSC. If you're coming out there making a left-hand turn, you got the same amount of traffic, the same challenge. And another dandy, that I call it the suicide turn, is coming off Rosemount, making a left turn onto Brookdale. Try that sometime. So anyway, I'd rather leave this for the next council to decide, and they can do what they want with it. But this time, I'm not going to, after just doing the budget, start loading up the next budget. Councillor Hollingsworth does make a point that he could get the money from somewhere else, but I'm going to stick to leave it for the next council.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also won't support this because in our last report, the last meeting, they weren't even in the top 25, number one, in accidents and things that had to be done. The other thing that really upsets me is the fact that there are so many other things that have to be done on tollgate on that road. The speeding, for example, is awful when you've got kids waiting for the school in the morning. The ditches that are there, and no sidewalks, that has to be fixed first, in my opinion. The other thing is the reserves, Madam CAO. I don't want to ask you whether you think we should take that money from the reserves or not. I don't happen to think so right now. I think we should wait till the next council. But what are your opinions on that, if you can give it to?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so if council wanted to proceed with it, you have to determine how you're going to fund it. So we could determine whether or not we could use federal gas tax. We would traditionally recommend, without going back and changing the budget document, fund it from working reserves. And then what would happen is in the 2023 budget, that payment has to go back to pay that project back to the reserve. So that's the decision of council.
Yeah, and I won't hold you to that. I just don't think right now it's something to do. I think there's a lot more work that has to be done there. I've seen children, I use that road a lot, and I see children waiting for their school buses in the morning, and people speeding in there. That's what needs to be cared for, first of all, and make sure that children are safe. And it wasn't too long ago that I heard in this table here, that I will never use reserves to get projects done, and this was not part of the budget, so I want it to be a part of the budget in 2023, and we'll move forward with it then. And right now, I can't support it.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I also use that corner quite a bit in the summer, and I would agree that it's tricky. And I would also agree that something probably needs to be done there, but what I can't agree with is 2 months after we finished a budget process, adding $200,000 to the budget, especially after we worked so hard to look for places to trim it when we're going through it. I would have no problem supporting this in the 2023 budget if it came back at that point. If somebody's to bring it up during the budget meetings for the next term, I think that's where it needs to be discussed, because it's a budgetary item. And we all know reserves have to be paid back. If we take it from another project, well, that project money also would have to be paid back. So there's no free money, and this just isn't budgeted for. And I agree something needs to be done about this intersection sooner or later, but I think it has to be done properly, and that's through the proper budget process, and not by adding to that budget, 2 months after we've gone through it already. So I can't support this motion at this time.
Anybody else? I'm just going to give my 2 cents here, or nickel's worth maybe. Usually council makes decisions on statistics. That's my history, has been that anyway. And statistics don't really support the motion. I drive my granddaughter most mornings through that intersection. And I come back and I use it the other way. To me, the biggest problem there is cars coming either direction, speeding. That's if there's one dangerous factor there, it's speeding. It's a very irregular. I have to agree with you, Councillor Hollingsworth. It's an irregular intersection, no question. But sight lines are great. I can see as far west and as far east as I want to, and I cross that intersection without a problem 90% of the mornings, and usually I may have to wait 2 minutes. So I don't think if we look at the speed chart, I asked Mr. Fothrop to get it. If you're coming off the number 2 highway and you come on to Vincent Massey, you're going 80 kilometers an hour, and it slows down to, supposedly, to slow down to 70 until you get to Mary Brown's. When you're doing 70, you know you're doing 80, because that's what I do anyway. I don't know. Usually 10 kilometers is that's, if I'm not, then someone's pushing me from behind. So I think what we have to do is one of two things, is change the speed along that route, or else have our police officers, maybe we'll talk about that at our police board meeting. I think it's, so for all the other reasons as well as budgetary issues, I can't support it, but I think there are things we can do to make it safer, and speed as control is one of them. So I can support that Councillor Hollingsworth's motion for those number of reasons. I don't think it's necessary at this time. Go ahead, Dean.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to sum up, a couple points that I think that might be noteworthy. First of all, Saunders Drive is expanding. There's going to be more houses. North Riverdale, going to be more houses, which means the traffic counts that we have already are just short of being bogus as we speak. And if they're not now, they will be soon. So using those traffic counts coming down Power Dam Drive in 3 years will be redundant or obsolete. So to suggest, well, we make decisions on stats, well, today perhaps, but we're talking about a corner that's been there for a long time and will be there long after probably most of us leave this particular table. The second thing, in terms of saying, well, we shouldn't access money because we've already struck the budget, maybe it's because I've kicked around long enough, Your Worship. I know that if there's a project that somebody, whether it be admin or a politician, thinks is noteworthy, we seem to be able to find money long after budgets have been struck. And what's curious is that had this particular report been on the agenda in December, there's a reasonable chance we'd have put the 200 grand in. And what's also noteworthy is if this report was being presented to us in maybe June or July, people saying, well, we've just struck the budget, so we can't really do anything now, that would be moot as well. So it's simply a matter of timelines that is holding this up. I think that's kind of regrettable. So I guess my point is the stats are almost obsolete. And as far as finding money, $200,000, it's not going to break us. And I will guarantee, I can't bet my house on it because I need a place to live, but if I was a rich and famous, I am willing to wager that there will be supplementary tax income. There almost invariably is, and we could use that to compensate for that 200,000. Another little tidbit, Your Worship, that's also noteworthy is that when we did that project to rewire Lamoureux Park, we had $95,000 in money that was put back into reserves that we could use that would mitigate that expense by half right off the chute. So now we're only talking about $40,000. Not a lot of money. Maybe I'm being a bit cavalier, but quite frankly, $40,000 in a $200 million budget, really, that's going to be our determining factor? I can see the way this is going to go. I'd be lying if I wasn't honest, painfully disappointed, but as Councillor Ober used to say, politics is messy. You just have to get used to it. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? Thank you. Next, Madam Clerk.
Next is another resolution. Whereas in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act as amended, the city shall, through this resolution, be permitted to receive applications to the Committee of Adjustment for variances from the provisions of zoning bylaw 2022-001 before the second anniversary of the day on which the bylaw was approved by Council. Whereas in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, the city shall, through this resolution, be permitted to amend the provisions of the zoning bylaw 2022-001 as future housekeeping initiative before the second anniversary of the day on which the bylaw was approved by Council. Now therefore be it resolved that planning supports the need of this resolution from Council and believes it to be appropriate at this time as it will eliminate unnecessary delays in the planning development approval process. Now therefore be it further resolved that application submissions for a minor variance for all properties within the City of Cornwall and future city-initiated housekeeping bylaw be authorized.
Motion? Councillor McDonald, second by Councillor Gardner. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh.
Sorry.
Did I miss your hand?
No, I'd like to introduce a resolution. I spoke to the clerk and she said this was the right time to do it.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'd like to introduce a resolution for the City of Cornwall to show solidarity and support for the country of Ukraine. Whereas the Federation of Russia has invaded the country of Ukraine, and whereas this invasion is regarded as illegal and unwarranted, and whereas Canada and many other countries are standing behind Ukraine and providing support, and whereas other municipalities such as Guelph have already taken similar measures, therefore be it resolved that the City of Cornwall fly the Ukrainian flag at City Hall and light our fountains in the colors of Ukraine.
Seconded. Councillor McIntosh. Discussion. Councillor McIntosh.
I want to thank Councillor Towndale for that, resolution, much needed. I believe there are a number of Ukrainian families living in the city and the area who have ties to that country, and it's really sad to see what's going on. It's depressing, and you hope for the best, and I don't know what's going to happen, but excellent idea. I was thinking that, but I think Ottawa did it, Toronto, and some of the, even New York City, and excellent idea. And, as a soldier, you have some knowledge of what goes into this stuff, and it's not pretty. And anyway, I think it's a great idea. I think it can be achieved, no problem, changing the lights.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it'd be quite straightforward to change the lights. I don't know how quickly we would be able to get a flag, but we will endeavor to get one.
Yeah, I noticed Ottawa has one outside City Hall, Ukrainian flag. And anyway, try Amazon.
Thank you for that, Councillor Towndale. Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, I just want to thank Councillor Towndale for bringing this forward. I was surprised when I walked in here tonight that we didn't have some pins with the colors of the Ukrainian people to wear to show our support, all of our support for the Ukrainian people. Hopefully we can get some of those for the next meeting, or hopefully this bloody war will be over and the murdering will stop.
Okay, all in favor of the motion? Thank you. Carried.
Unfinished business list reports, Mr. Mayor. The first one is Ottsville Theatre lease with St. Lawrence College, with a recommendation that council receive this report and provide approval to proceed to enter both the lease agreement for Ottsville Theatre with St. Lawrence College and the MOU with Ottsville Theatre commencing on March 1st.
Motion? Councillor McDonald, Councillor Bennett. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
And we are looking for a motion to receive the unfinished business listing.
Motion? Councillor McDonald, Councillor Carolyn Hebert. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Going back to consent item 9, Mr. Mayor, climate emergency update with a recommendation that council receive this report.
Motion? Councillor McDonald, second. Councillor Towndale. Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm really happy to see this come back. It hasn't been that long since we had the presentation, so I'm glad to see that admin is moving on this quickly. And I just have a little hope that even though the climate change lens that we're developing is limited to what we can do in our city, given the fact that there's an opportunity here to join the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, I just wonder if we could somehow stretch an inclusion into the report on how beneficial it would be if we had more means of intercity transportation in terms of, trains and buses, things that would take cars off the road. beyond our city borders. So if, when you do prepare that report, if you think that there's opportunity there, given, you know, well, just given the logic of the fact that pollution doesn't stop at city borders, if we can squeeze in a reference to intercity travel, it would be good. Thank you.
All in favor of the motion? Carried, thank you. Madam Clerk?
Moving on to bylaws, Mr. Mayor. Bylaws 2022-21 to 33 inclusive, listed on the agenda, are being presented to council for adoption.
Motion? Councillor Gardner, Councillor Hebert. All in favor? Carried, thank you.
And we are now at the reports from standing, advisory, special, and ad hoc committees, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On February 25th, I attended Alpha Symposium. I spent 7 hours on Zoom with special speaker Lisa McLeod was the invited guest. Alpha is an association of the health units across Ontario, and there were doctors involved in a symposium from all over Ontario. We discussed areas which included mental health issues after COVID-19, funding needs in future for health units, resumptions of surgical procedures, including 105 people on a waiting list, as an example, hip surgeries. Dr. Kieran Moore talked about the current state of COVID-19 and Omicron, homelessness, affordable housing. We heard Monica Turner, who's our representative from AMO, talk about the massive federal and provincial debts and how will Ontario's new health teams be funded, and we want representation from municipalities on that health team. There were a lot of other things that I dealt with over 7 hours, but one of the most crucial and one of the most worst crises we have in this country now in Ontario was the opioid crisis, which we're dealing with young people dying all over the place, and laced with fentanyl, and they don't know it. Every doctor from all parts of Ontario brought this opioid crisis up, and we need to do something to stop this from our young people dying from it. There are a lot of other things that I could tell you that we talked about. However, for the space of time that we have, if you have any questions or about anything that I talked about, I have 5 pages of notes that I'd be glad to talk to you about. So, but right now, this is basically an idea of what we did. Homelessness was a big problem too. So was affordable housing. It was a problem that was discussed for a long period of time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your time. Thanks, Council, for giving me that time.
Anybody else? Moving on.
Next is the confirming bylaw, Mr. Mayor.
Motion to approve, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Bennett, all in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Hebert, Councillor Gardner, all in favor? Thank you for a good meeting. It's very, very good.